Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Thursday Morning Torah. This morning, we have a particularly knotty and difficult Torah portion. One of those Torah portions that I remember my father saying that he wished sometimes that we could move the reading of Leviticus to the summer and move Deuteronomy, which is so full of such wonderful stuff, to the spring, because living in Philadelphia, people would leave for the summer, and then you would have all this wonderful material in Deuteronomy, but the synagogue would be half full, and you wouldn't get to give the Deuteronomy sermons in the spring when you're left with Torah portions like we have this week. It is a double portion Tazria Mitzorah, and the predominant theme is skin disease. Now, skin disease, I suppose, if you suffer from one, is a really important topic, but it is somewhat less than inspiring as a topic for Torah conversation. Having said that, I do think that there are at least a couple of things that are both interesting and important that we can talk about relating to this Torah portion. And I'm going to begin by doing what the commentators do, which is identifying Mitzorah, which again is a form of tzara'at. It's not leprosy exactly. It's another kind of skin disease, and probably not a contagious one, which is not why people were sent out of the camp, but we'll get to that in a minute. Nonetheless, by identifying Mitzorah with Motzi Shem Ra, you can hear, even if you don't speak Hebrew, Mitzorah, Motzi Shem Ra has similar sound, and Motzi Shem Ra is one of the categories of gossip and evil speech that Judaism anatomizes. And so the rabbis say that the punishment for evil speech was the skin disease. And of course, among other things, they have a good precedent with Miriam, who is stricken with a kind of leprosy after gossiping about Moses' sister, not Moses' wife, rather. Miriam is Moses' sister. She did not gossip about herself. Well, maybe she did, but we don't know about it. She did, however, gossip about Moses' wife, Tzipporah, and was stricken with a skin disease as a result. And so Motzi Shem Ra, the idea that leprosy or skin disease of some kind is a punishment for gossip, is the predominant theme. And most of the sermons and writings and so on that exist about this Torah portion, although it's not going to be our predominant theme today, are in fact about gossip. And so let's give at least a little bit of time to that subject. First of all, because it is the most popular sin. And it's the most popular sin because, first of all, there are so many different ways to do it, right? You can say true things about someone else. You can say untrue things about someone else. You can repeat things that you heard without knowing whether they're true or not. You can praise someone in the hope that someone else will say, it's not so true. You may be exaggerating. There are endless shadings to gossip, right? Talking about the accoutrements of someone's, they live in a really big house. They live in a really small house. Almost anything you say about somebody, if said in a certain context or with a certain intonation or so on, can be fodder for gossip. And the biblical and rabbinic prohibitions against gossip, which were codified in particular by one rabbi, Rabbi Israel Meir Kagan, who was known as the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim means one who desires life, and it's because he took his name from the verse in Psalms, Mi ha'ish hechafetz chaim ohev yamim derotov nitzor l'shon chamera, which means who is the man who desires life and wants to live a long time, the one who flees from evil speech. And so the Chofetz Chaim codified all the different kinds of speech that you were allowed to indulge in and not allowed to indulge in. And all I can say is that since the time of the Chofetz Chaim, there has been no reduction in the quantity of gossip. In fact, there's probably been a tremendous acceleration with the advance of the media in the quantity of gossip, especially about celebrities, but not only about celebrities. And gossip is one of those irrepressible and yet extraordinarily dangerous and damaging things that everyone indulges in to some extent. After all, it's very difficult not to talk about the people you know. That would severely limit your conversation. And yet, at the same time, you are aware that to speak about the people that you know is a very dicey undertaking, because after all, everybody is aware of the fact that reputations are essential and that gossiping about them can destroy them. And you learn this by the first place you really learn it, I suppose, is in high school, where you live in what is the equivalent of a village. And when you live in a village, that is, when you live in a smaller community where everybody talks about everybody and knows everything, gossip is particularly damaging and hurtful. And it is the kind of thing that we like to tell other people not to do. But to refrain from it ourselves is extremely difficult and takes a lot of discipline, especially because telling people things is one of the ways you demonstrate your closeness to them. That's one, right? I mean, I'm close to you, so I will tell you this, but nobody else. Of course, that other person also has only one person they tell, and on and on. But also because it demonstrates a certain power and prestige that you know things. To be in the know, as we say, is to show that you matter. And therefore, to not gossip is to both reduce a certain possibility for intimacy and reduce a certain possibility of being seen as powerful or in the inner circle. That's cute. Guy says, I don't like Lashon Hara, so I listened very carefully the first time. So the temptation to be in the inner ring, as C.S. Lewis writes about, is the cause of a lot of cruelty and sin in our world. The desire to be in that circle, in the know, to have made it. So I think that all of this, in terms of, whoops, sorry about that, my light just went out. Not by the way, spiritually, just physically. Let me see if I can put that back on. I'm still here. I'm just here in the darkness. There we go. Now I'm here in the light again. And that desire to be in the know, both socially and even in your own mind, is certainly the cause of a great deal of gossip and a great deal of damaging gossip. And so anyway, that is the usual explanation of Motzi Shem Ra. And most interpretations and discussions of this parsha will focus on the question of gossip. And you certainly can speak about that or comment about that or whatever. But that isn't actually what I want to focus on this morning. Instead, I want to talk about the punishment for gossip, or for Motzi Shem Ra, or for whatever the sin is, usually though assumed to be gossip. Because the punishment that is given is to send the offender out of the camp. And the remarkable part of that punishment is that you would assume, and it would be a logical assumption, that the reason you send the person out of the camp is because their disease is contagious, but it does not seem that that is the case. And so there are a variety of other explanations about why the person is sent out of the camp. One of them is that the camp itself is pure, and this person has contracted some kind of impurity, almost like they will infect the camp, not individuals, but all of Israel is touched by this sense of impurity. Another, which Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who was the great Mussar rabbi, the great rabbi of morals and ethics, that was his focus always, says, the reason you send a gossip out of the camp is you say, look, if you've gossiped about people, you obviously have a very keen eye for people's flaws, right? Because that's usually what gossip is. It's about people's flaws. So since you're so good at spotting people's flaws, maybe if you spend some time alone, you'll spot yours. And that's the idea of going out of the camp. I want to shift the focus, though, to something that interests me in general, and in particular in the Jewish tradition and in this parsha, which is the question of solitude. Because when you send someone out of the camp in ancient Israel, you are really sending them into solitude in the desert or even in the land. It's not like house arrest. You can't watch TV. You can't turn on the computer. You can't call someone on the phone. You can't interact, remember, the way it's really solitude. And what does that mean in terms of the very social nature, not only of human beings, but also of the Jewish tradition? Whitehead said that religion is what one does with his solitude, but in Judaism, that's not actually the case. Judaism is a very social tradition, and solitude is relatively minimal in the Jewish tradition. But here is an example of when I think solitude could be seen as salutary as well as punishing. That is, it's for a good reason too. So let me just go through a little bit about solitude, and then I'll take some of the questions and comments that are arising. In the Jewish tradition, the first thing that is condemned in the Bible is aloneness, right? Everything is called good. As you go through creation, this is good and that's good, and God created this and it was good. And then you get to the phrase, Lo tov hayot ha'adam levado. It's not good for a person to be alone. So solitude or aloneness, but they're not the same, and we'll come to that, that's the first thing that's called not good. And yet, we have examples in our tradition of solitude as a school, that is, as a training ground. So, for example, in the Hasidic tradition, there's something called hitbodedut, which means literally aloneness, where people would go off into the forest and spend time alone in silent contemplation and with God, to draw closer to God and closer to themselves. And this notion, Pascal, the great Blaise Pascal, the great mathematician, philosopher, said that all of the troubles of the modern world stem from the inability of someone to sit alone in their room. And that may be something of an exaggeration, but you understand what he's saying, which is that the ability to be alone with yourself, without distraction, without a constant irritable searching for something to divert you, forces you to go deeper. And you could see being sent outside the camp as an attempt to get the person to engage in the kind of self-examination that is very difficult to do if you are constantly engaged in the bustle of life. And this notion, there's a beautiful example of this notion in the beginning of Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of Our Fathers. It says, the very beginning of it, which is a rabbinic text, it's the Mishnah, and it's the most popular Mishnah because it's full of like wise advice and so on, but it's where you'll find Hillel's, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And Rabbi Tarfon's, it is not your job to finish the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. A lot of famous rabbinic phrases come from Pirkei Avot, but it starts like this. Moshe kibel Torah Sinai. Moses got the Torah from Sinai. Now, we understand what that's saying, right? Sinai is a stand-in, autonomy for God there. That's what it means. But Abravanel, who was a commentator in the time of the Inquisition, a very famous commentator, but we'll leave him aside for a moment and just examine what he said. Abravanel says, why does it say that Moses got the Torah from Sinai? Why doesn't it just say Moses got the Torah from God, right? What's the point and the purpose of putting Sinai there? And his answer is, had Moses not spent 40 days alone on a mountain, he would not have been spiritually prepared to receive the Torah from God. It didn't take 40 days for him to get the Torah, but it took that time for him to be prepared to receive it. And that idea that Moses' solitude was essential to being able to receive the Torah, it's a very powerful notion. And the sending someone out of the camp for gossiping, cutting off their social interaction because they have interacted socially in a bad way, right? In an unproductive way, in a destructive way, allows the person to sit with themselves and to examine themselves and to heal themselves in a way. Because remember that the purpose of giving, this sounds strange, even when I'm saying it in my mind, before I say it out loud, it sounds strange, but the purpose of giving someone a skin disease is that unlike other ailments, a skin disease is obvious to everyone. So somebody who has gossip, to be stricken with a social disease, which is what a skin disease is, that is a disease that everybody can see, which makes you the focus of gossip, right? That's what it does. That's the purpose of it. I mean, the whole point of getting a skin disease in the Bible is that people can see it. So if you've gossiped about other people and then you're stricken with the disease that people gossip about, and then you have to go off and think about it's like the timeout step in the desert, right? It's a very powerful model of self-education and growth. So I don't think that it is a coincidence that this remedy is prescribed for this ailment. And there's a really important lesson to be learned here about the function of solitude, especially in a time when so many of us have had enforced solitude. Now, it is not the same as the solitude of ancient times, for the very simple reason, of course, that we can be alone and yet not alone, right? I'm sitting alone in my room now, but I'm talking to lots of people. That was not possible, obviously, in the ancient world. And yet, the solitude that we have experienced has been so much greater in the past year than most of us, perhaps any of us, experience other times, that I think that this is a very apt and powerful part of the Torah to think about, to contemplate, and to speak about. And so I wanted to bring that up, not just about gossip, but also about aloneness. And yes, I think that it is, when you ask about, okay, let's take two different questions. Wendy asks, what's the line between gossiping and honestly being troubled or burdened by what you've heard and sharing your pain with someone else? And then Jeff talks about, is this early Hebrew communities being insular? And well, yes, I mean, all communities, by the way, in ancient times were insular, right? And I think that was also true in medieval times. I mean, there may have been a worldwide Christian community, but villages were villages, right? It wasn't until the invention of the city, of the big city, which you did have in ancient times, but there were only one or two, right? There weren't many. And between the destruction of Rome and about 18th or 19th century London, no city was that big. So yeah, I think that I don't want to, insularity unfortunately has a negative connotation. Let's say the intimacy of small groups, both in ancient times and now, is both natural to human beings because our natural group is fairly small, and also definitely contributes to gossip, which is why in small organizations, clubs, churches, synagogues, other organizations, you get so much, high schools, you get so much gossip because it's like being in a village where everyone knows everyone and talks about everyone. The answer, I think, to Wendy's question about sharing your pain as opposed to gossiping is twofold. First of all, you have to interrogate your own motives. Why are you really saying this? Usually we get pleasure out of gossip. Not relief, but pleasure. It's a charge to be able to say something about someone else. And so if you're getting pleasure out of it, I think you have to at least suspect that your motive might not be pure. And the other part of this is what will be the effect of sharing your pain? Will the effect of sharing your pain be to diminish someone else's standing and to hurt them, in effect? Will sharing your pain cause someone else pain? That's the other thing that I think we have to at least think about before gossiping. That's also what Jim said is true, which is if you banish someone, they're no longer in the know, which is itself a punishment if you gossip. I suppose that's absolutely the case. And it's true when Moses leaves Egypt, also from Jim, that he is alone for a little while until he comes across, the shepherds who are trying to prevent Zipporah from watering her flock and saves her, and then finds his wife. So I don't know, and Jerry's question is an excellent question. I don't know if I was the chief gossip officer for, Fox or NPR or CNN or any of the networks, what would I say you can say and you can't say? Because news, which is partly gossip, at least the first part of this is to be really careful about what you can verify and what you can't verify. The second part of this is, I think it's different to hold the powerful to account and to gossip about people, especially those who are not powerful. So that's the other part of it, is that humor, satire, reality about especially powerful people that holds them to account, I think that's essential to keep a society healthy. The only place where you can't make fun of the rulers of society are dictatorships, and that's inherently unhealthy. But it is a difficult line, and I think at least I would hope that there's some struggle with it, and we all are subject to this temptation about saying things that you shouldn't. Can you gossip to yourself when you're alone? No, because that's not gossip. I mean, whatever you think, what you think, I think in your own mind is, depending on what you say as a result of it, is not going to do someone else damage, right? You can think whatever you want, but that's not going to hurt somebody necessarily. Now, I do agree that I do agree with Guy that it depends what you mean by gossip. A certain amount of discussion of other people is certainly essential to forming human communities, right? I don't think you can banish all discussion of other people, but I think that we know sometimes, or maybe all the time, when what we're saying is a way of bonding and what we're saying is a way of wounding. So I'm not sure. I don't think that a society could thrive according to the laws of the Chafetz Chaim, and my guess is one never did. But I do think that we are heedless and reckless with people's reputations, and often, and not often, but virtually always, they're left without recourse. Most people who are gossiped about don't have a platform to get up and say, by the way, that's not true. And the reality that is sometimes hard for us to absorb is that rumors can be completely untrue, even though everybody's convinced that they are true, which is shocking, but the case. And so we know things. I mean, we really know them, and we're certain of them, and we have evidence of them, and they're completely untrue. And that is, I think, an important thing to keep in mind, that in fact, if you ever read a story in the newspaper, you will discover that if it's about something that you know personally, it's very, very hard to get someone else's story right. And you will find all sorts of things that get it wrong, no matter how scrupulous the reporter is. So when we gossip, the chances that we're getting it right are actually not nearly as good as we think. And the more salacious the gossip, the likelier the chance that it's not true in some ways, because the more irresistible it is to repeat without any kind of checking. So there's, I think that I can't, I think that what the Chafetz Chaim did was a kind of quixotic task. I'm not sure that you can lay down hard and fast rules for what kind of speech about others is permitted and what isn't. So, for example, by the way, just in case you're wondering, he said that you're allowed to say negative things about somebody if you're giving a job recommendation, because then you're being relied on to tell the truth about someone's character. You still don't have to disclose everything, right? You can disclose without disclosing. I will. It's many years ago. Okay, I was in the position of maybe hiring someone for the synagogue. I won't even disclose what the position was, but I called that. I had some doubts after an interview about this person. I wasn't sure. So I called that person's boss at the previous place of employment. And I said, I'm considering hiring so-and-so. I'm calling you. This person did not put you down as a recommendation. And if you don't want to answer my questions, obviously you don't have to. But I have some questions, and I wonder if you would tell me like what you thought of this person. And he said, I can't tell you because the lawsuit has a non-disclosure agreement. Now, I didn't know about any lawsuit. I said, may I take that as you're telling me something without telling me? He said, if you wish to, you certainly may. And that was enough, right? My concerns about this person, I felt, were confirmed, and that was that. But I think the Chafetz Chaim would say that was a perfectly legitimate exchange, and nobody violated the laws of gossip. But if I had called and he had said, you know, I heard that this person once did such and such, that would be a violation, because he heard it, he didn't know it, and it wasn't really what I had asked about, and I suppose it could have affected his employment. But and I have many such stories, as everyone does, about rumors that I believe that turned out not to be true, or rumors that did turn out to be true, or rumors that I still to this day don't know whether they're true or not. And so, yeah, it should be a reminder, as Clinton says. Is this the most violated law? No question about it, in my mind. And on Yom Kippur, in fact, there are several al-chets that talk about prohibited speech. I think that it's very hard to go through an entire day without violating or skirting the edge of violation of prohibited speech. And I think maybe part of the point of all this is that it reminds us just how easy it is, and makes us more sensitive to the reality that we are frequently saying things about other people that gossip. Well, gossip, there are different kinds of prohibited speech in the Jewish tradition. There is motzi shem ra, is to literally defame someone. But there's also anything that contributes to someone thinking less of someone else that doesn't need to be said. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? I mean, those are basically the rules. So, and sometimes, by the way, as I said, it can even be positive speech if you know that it will evoke negative speech. If you feel like somebody doesn't really like someone, you go, I think he's a great guy. And you're just waiting for them to say, well, you've provoked gossip somewhat deliberately. So gossip can be almost any discussion of someone else that turns negative without, even if it's true, it doesn't have to be untrue. If I know that somebody's done something discreditable and I tell you just because I want you to know that you should think less of them, that's gossip. Because why is it my job to make you think less of them? And also, then you've heard it from me. How do you know it's true? So it's very, very hard to go through a day without speaking gossip, and even harder to go through a day without consuming gossip, since every newspaper, every TV broadcast, on and on and on and on, and about 50% of your texts are gossip adjacent, if not gossip themselves. And as I said, it's not right. Exactly. Yes. Linda, your mom's lesson about not saying, if you don't have something nice to say about someone, don't say anything at all, is definitely Lashon Hara related. Lashon Hara just means evil speech. Lashon is literally tongue, and Ra is evil. So it's an evil tongue. And we all know how hard it is. We all know how hard it is. It is not, it's not easy to get through a day without saying something negative about other people. But it is important to keep these ideas in mind, because without them, we don't have any sense of the damage that we're doing until, unfortunately, we are ourselves victims of gossip. And then we protest about how could people say such things. So it is, it's good to keep in mind. And it is, it's also, I recommend to you, by the way, let me just close by recommending, it might be behind a paywall, you may or may not be able to see it, but several days ago, like 5 or 6 days ago, in the Washington Post, Alexandra Petrie, who was a columnist there, wrote a wonderful column about the Congressman Matt Gaetz, who what it is said, and again, this, I don't know if this is true, and therefore it is, I suppose, a species of gossip, although it has been so widely publicized that I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't know, that he showed pictures of women that he had slept with that were unclothed to other congressmen. And she said, there will always be people who will do things like that. I understand that. They shouldn't, but they do. But there's a moral courage required in saying no, in being the person who says, I don't want to see this. It doesn't make me think better of you to see such pictures. And the same thing I think is true with gossip. By the way, I really recommend that column. It was morally astute. That is, it's not only about speaking gossip, it's about saying to people, I don't want to hear that kind of thing, which is very hard to do because it makes the other person feel bad. But sometimes there are lines that are worth being drawn about what we don't want to see or don't want to hear, or don't want to be a part of. So gossip is not only about what you say, it's also about what you open yourself to hearing. And it's hard. It's hard. But in terms of like the moral health of a society that is given over entirely to gossip and doesn't have any moral lines about what you can say about other people, that's not a good model, and certainly not a Jewish model. As our Torah portion this morning shows, whether it is true or it is not true. So there you have it. And as I said, I think that there are exceptions, especially in terms of holding powerful people who have power over others to account, because such people have a different responsibility in society and therefore have to be held to different standards. So yes, if you think that someone's about to gossip to you, should you stop them? Jennifer asks, in the Chafetz Chaim would say absolutely. right? If you ask the Chafetz Chaim, you say, I don't want to hear that kind of talk. That's not, right? That's not, I mean, no. That at least is the ideal, as hard as it is, and I know that it's hard, because we are connective and verbal creatures. So I don't think we will ever eliminate gossip, but I do think that we can be more sensitive and more aware of the damage that it does, especially as the platforms on which we can gossip proliferate endlessly. Could I repeat the article I'm referring to? Yes. In the Washington Post, the columnist is Alexandra Petri. It's Petri or RIE. I don't remember. I think it's just Petri. But it was a very astute column. I don't remember what it was called. I might be able to find at least the name of it. Hold on just 1 second, because I sent it to someone, and therefore it should be in my sent emails. Here we go. Yes, it is. I'll tell you what date it is. It is April 5th. Alexandra Petri, Petri. It's called "This Should Not Happen More Than Once," from the Washington Post. This should not happen more than once. Alexandra Petri, Petri. It's a very, very good column. Okay, and with that, Torah, columnists, gossip, and solitude. That is the title of today's Torah class. Okay, so I hope you will join me if you can for Clubhouse Torah tonight at 6. But hope, if not, to see you if you're a member in synagogue on Saturday morning, and if not, online Saturday morning. And have a Shabbat Shalom, and a Shabbat in which you say